Hi, welcome to Believe in Biddeford. My name is Brad Favreau. I am the Economic Development Coordinator for the city, and I am very pleased to be here today with Jeff Cabral from the MacArthur Library and Priscilla McGuire, a former school principal. And we're here to discuss today the Biddeford Mills Museum. So Jeff, you're the director of the library. I wonder if you could tell us how you got involved in the library, or excuse me, in the Biddeford Mills Museum.
Sure. Well, I moved here in 2011, and the last mill had closed in 2009. And when I moved here to take the job as director of the library, I had an archivist on staff who had worked with my predecessor, the former director of the library. Those two individuals and a number of other individuals in the community had formed a loosely knit sort of group or steering committee, if you will, that were looking to preserve the history and the legacy of the mills and the artifacts that were within the mills as much as they could. So they had begun organizing trips into the mills to make sure that as much material as they could recover and retain was held onto and at least put in one part of the mill. By that point, all of the looms and the large machinery had actually been sold off for scrap metal, unfortunately, so most of the big pieces of equipment were gone. So that group continued working for a year or so until we decided to formulate it in a more organized fashion into the Biddeford Mills Museum. We formed a board. We applied for and received a private nonprofit status, so we are a 501c3 or a private nonprofit in the community. We've had that status for about 6 years, I believe, and then shortly after that we started. Some of the same individuals are involved now. Some have gone, and we've had many new board members come on, and we started doing tours soon after that. And then it really just built from there into who we are today.
Mm-hmm. And Priscilla, how did you first get involved?
Well, I moved here, retired here in 2012. Mm-hmm. And I was taking the Master Gardener course, and I met Holly Cullerton, who was then chair or president of Heart of Biddeford. We were just chit-chatting, and I'm a history major and a history teacher by background. And she said, well, just go on the Biddeford Mills Museum website, and they have little comments or boards. So I wrote in what I did for a living and asked what I could do for them. And the next thing I knew, I was being interviewed by Scott Jocelyn. Mm-hmm. And then he recommended Pepper Mill Center, right? And he told me to go join the mill vets or the mill alumni that meet regularly once a week. So I started with them, and then eventually I got onto the board.
Yeah, yeah. So, Jeff, explain to us what specifically is the museum and perhaps what it is not right now. In other words, what is it? Where do we plan to take it? Oh, and right. For the viewers, I have to, one full disclosure, I myself am an ex officio member of the board of directors of the museum.
So we've always talked about how the space of the Pepperell Mill campus, which is quite vast, the museum doesn't necessarily have a physical space right now. The space is the museum, and that's sort of the catchphrase that we've used over the years. So what we are is a group of people, and we are completely a volunteer organization at this point. We hope that will change in the near future, that we'll have the ability to bring a part-time director, a paid staff member, but we are and always have been a completely 100% volunteer-run organization. We have a board of about 10 people. We have an active group of volunteers, most of which are actually board members too, who have been operating tours for 5 of the 6 years since we've been a nonprofit. They offer a regular tour season in the summer for the members of the public, and then in the off-season, in the spring and fall, we'll do special request group tours. We do an awful lot of group tours for organizations like historical societies or retirement communities or different educational facilities. lots of school groups do those in the spring and the fall, and then the winter we actually go to organizations. We have an outreach visit program where we'll go and do a presentation. We can do presentations that show people what it's like to tour the mills. We can do presentations on the mill girls, various historical aspects of immigration as relates to the mills. And so we don't have a physical, a lot of people will say, well, where is the Biddeford Mills Museum? While we have a space in the mill which we use for the volunteers and where we have our collection, that's not open to the public. What we are working on and have been working on is an exhibit, which will be open to the public before the end of this summer, and that will be in 40 Main Street in the lobby, lobby or venue space right adjacent to Portland Pie on Main Street. There's a couple pieces of that exhibit that have already come together. The rest of that will be coming together in the next month or so. And that's an exhibit that we've worked on in conjunction with Maine Historical Society for the last couple of years. They've been a big help and an important partner to us in curating that exhibit and constructing it, and pieces are being built as we speak. So that'll be the first real opportunity to put the public face of the museum out there. So that's an exciting piece of the project's and the organization's history. And then eventually we'd like to be in our own space open to the public year-round as a proper museum, or what people think of as an actual museum.
Right, right. Because when you say Biddeford Mills Museum, you want to know where the exhibit space is.
Right.
So right now you do, just to clarify in my own mind, you do tours of the buildings, you do outreach in terms of adult education, I think, and temporary exhibits, movable exhibits, I think you used the term in Pepperell Center. Yeah, all with the goal of a permanent exhibit space coming up soon.
Yep,
Yeah.
and we've done an awful lot of oral history interviews too. So we have some many hours of raw footage of some individuals, many individuals, including some of whom have passed away in the last 6 years. A lot of former mill workers or people that were important to the history of the community or the mills in some way, and that raw footage will at some point be turned into either footage that we'll use in the exhibit space or museum space, maybe put something together for, an actual documentary purposes, but that's a ways off. But we do have grand plans.
So the original people who got the ball rolling with the museum, some are still on the board, I imagine, and doing tours, and some are not. Do you feel like you have the manpower and the staffing to continue to move forward?
We do. We actively are looking, and we have recruited volunteers for the tours. We can always use more volunteers. I mean, like any nonprofit organization, things that you often need are volunteers and funding or financing. Priscilla could sort of speak to she's been sort of running the volunteer recruitment program to bring in some new tour guides, and I think we've got several. We added one last year. I think some of those people are either new to Biddeford. They may not necessarily be former mill workers, but that's going to be the evolution of the tours, is they're not necessarily going to always be given by people who used to work in the mills like they are now.
Priscilla, do you have anything to add?
Well, most of the people that come in for the training to be a tour guide tend to be people that are interested in history.
Right.
And most of them tend to be retired because they have the time to do it. So it's a really nice match, but we'll take people that like to do something every summer, people where they're in a business situation where they might need community service, because there are a lot of things that can be done besides the tours. There are some back things in the office if they like to work with computers. We have archiving, we have we upload pictures to the main memory network. Those type of things in the office can be done as well by volunteers.
So you've got plenty of work for volunteers.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah. So what is the specific story that you would like the museum to tell to your visitors?
Well, I think the basic story is there would be no Biddeford if there wasn't the mills. Biddeford was originally, and Saco across the river was originally a tiny village of farmers. And when they came up and discovered the falls, the people from Lowell came up and discovered the falls, they thought it was a great place for a mill, particularly a cotton mill. So then the land was being bought up, and over the years the mill kind of dominated the village, and the village grew into the city that you know today. So we'd like to do that historically, and also talk about the diversity of people who came to the mills, because there are many countries, I would say maybe 50 to 70 countries that had workers come to the mill.
That many?
And one of the mill alumni says it was really a boost when the people came in. Every country that they had working at the mill, they would come in through an entrance, and they had hung all the flags of the people of the countries that were working in the mill. So it kind of made people feel very good that they were kind of being included in everything. So and it was very easy for an immigrant to get a job in the mill, because English was not terribly required to run the machinery at all. As long as you could run the machinery, that was the thing. And then eventually they learned English and assimilated into the community.
And let's just say 80 years ago, what kind of machines might we have seen in the mill buildings? Obviously looms.
Draper looms, jacquard looms. I mean, the process of taking cotton from a bale to a blanket, or from a bale to a Civil War tent, or from a bale to a bed sheet is for the most part pretty standard, but really quite complicated. There's there's almost a machine for every step of the process, a carding machine.
Carding machine. Can you explain what that is to the viewers who don't know?
Oh, I wish there was someone else here that could explain what a carding machine is better than I could.
I think is it the machine that basically combs the fibers of the cotton in a single direction so that it can later be spun?
I believe so, but right now, as you're explaining it, I can guarantee you that there's former mill workers in Biddeford that are sitting at home turning to their spouses and explaining it better than any of us can. That's part of what we're going to have in the exhibit is sort of and we actually have a little bit of a digital exhibit right now on Main Memory Network called Making Cloth, which was set up years ago by the library working with something called the Biddeford History and Heritage Project, and it goes through all of those steps of that process, much in trying to make those steps into something that the average person can understand is really important. And that's something that we want young generations to really appreciate too, is that things were made in this city, and and there's not an awful lot of things made. There are things made in Biddeford now,
right?
But in sort of grand terms, a lot of people talk about how things aren't made as much in America. Well, this was definitely a city of makers and technical know-how and engineering and innovation, and it was a city that the history was important to the mill. The history of the mills was vital to Biddeford. Biddeford was the mills, and the mills were Biddeford, but it was also vital to Maine, the Northeast, and Pepperell products had. Pepperell products were exported all over the world, and then years later, Velux products. That's an important segment of the story from the '60s to the mill being closed. The Velux blanket was what kept the mills going for another 40 years, and that blanket was, I can't remember the exact figure, but the amount of Velux blankets they churned out a day was massive, and that blanket was sold all around the world. So that's a big piece of the story. We want younger generations to understand that things were made, how they were made, and that it was important that they were done here, and that the Pepperell name, the Biddeford name, the Velux name really meant something then and now, and we don't want that to be lost. As mill towns in New England revitalize, and they're all doing it, and bring new organizations, companies, artists, residents into formerly occupied mill spaces, all of those communities, not all of them, but many of those communities from Manchester to Lowell to Woonsocket, all have something in their community where they're preserving the history. Well, this is Biddeford's answer to that, is making sure that that history and legacy of the mills, the people who work there, the processes they did, is not lost, and that's important to us.
You mentioned a bit ago that perhaps the looms and carding machines and some other machinery was lost along the way. What artifacts do you now have in your possession that will be a part of the final exhibit?
It's a secret. No, it's not. Do you want to answer that question?
Yes, a lot of the artifacts we have deal with the creation of the mill.
Mm-hmm.
We have ledgers, handwritten ledgers that go back to the 1840s that indicate, who was on the committee that was investing in the mill. Former Governor and Vice President Hamlin was part of that discussion. Most of the people were from Harvard businessmen, and so they were the ones that were backing it. A lot of them had invested in Lowell's cotton industry, and so we have. And then as the mills went on, the ledgers show what they bought. It's a whole inventory of everything they bought, everything they made. It's really fascinating to see. How much did they pay for oil for the lamps?
Oh yeah, everything was accounted for.
Everything was
I've seen
accounted for.
Part of those ledgers, and
Right.
it's very interesting.
And the handwriting is beautiful.
Right.
They're not teaching cursive in schools anymore, so probably most people won't be able to read them. But it is they're wonderful to look at. And also going forward, when the mills, when the Pepperell and Laconia mills merged, we have a lot of the documents, founding documents of that as well, and the correspondence between the stockbrokers and stockholders and all of that. So there's a large degree of actual paperwork. There's not all of it. A lot of it got destroyed when the mill went down. And then we have a lot of pictures of the mill at different stages, and also more of a human interest, the things that the mill workers did. They had a strong union. They had softball teams, bowling teams, that type of thing. So we have those type of pictures, and we don't know sometimes who are in them. So one of the things that probably will be interesting is if we can get them on display and see who remembers who they were.
Personal interest.
Right. So we have a lot of those kind of artifacts. And then we have physical ones that are like the chop blocks, which are kind of like, today I think you'd call them logos. And they were the blocks that you would print to put on the bales of cotton or the boxes, so that you'd know what it was inside. And the griffin, which is the symbol of all of the Pepperell products, was developed when they decided to sell drill fabric to China. And they wanted a symbol that would be something known to the Chinese, and so that they could associate it when the boxes came in or the bales came in, that was Pepperell.
Something that had like a dragon-like quality to it.
Right. So
Which
that's
signified quality, I'm guessing, or
eventually, yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
So that became associated with the quality of the drill fabric. So even though they didn't speak English, they could recognize the product immediately. And the mills were very particular about the quality of the product, so that anyone who felt the product knew the quality. Anything that wasn't up to that quality was never shipped out.
Nice.
If I could add to the collection too, there's also so lots of printed material, like Priscilla said, lots of photos. Also some interesting sort of relics of industrial signage, like industrial safety signage and signs that were up around the mill. Tools and some small tools and small machinery too. Some things that are still in place within the mill that we may or may not be able to move physically into a space, which we'd like to. There's quite a bit of machinery associated with the Velux phase. And then we've had some tools donated to us in the last couple of years too by former mill workers, like tool cases basically. Things that were used to fix the machines or get the machines optimized for running, things like that. And I believe, video too from the last day the mill was open, right?
Yes.
So lots of little, lots of little interesting things. I think it's, our collection, we had it assessed and evaluated once by someone who was more involved with the museum world than any of us were at the time. And she said our collection was, definitely 20th century heavy and a little light on the 19th century. And it stands to reason because that's what was saved because it's the most recent material. But, ultimately we can sort of go in and build the collection up from the 19th century in terms of things that we can find or things that may be in people's attics or basements now that were left behind or left for future generations.
Well, that's a nice segue into my next question, and that is what's coming up for the museum? What are your immediate plans for new exhibits or expansion, or what are the next steps?
Well, the exhibit that's going to be in 40 Main Street space really sort of focuses on, the people are a big thing, the people, the immigration, the Velix phase, the process of cotton, machinery. There's actually a nice timeline already up there with a mural of the river and the timeline that sort of takes you from the 1840s up until today of how the mill progressed. Finishing the construction of that exhibit and having basically an official opening before the end of the summer, that's, goal number one for us at the moment. I think also, and we intend that exhibit to be up in that space for at least a couple of years. But behind the scenes, we're gonna, we'll be working on and have been working on ultimately locating a permanent home where that exhibit can go, but also where some of our other pieces from our collection can be seen. So for us, that'll be a big step in trying to find a permanent home in Biddeford, most likely within the mill complex somewhere. And having the funding and ability to have the staffing, have a staff member involved, that's a big piece too. And also, we continue to build and promote the tour options. We have been advertising in the main motor coach network, which goes to tour operators from Canada throughout America as well. So we're envisioning more tour bus inquiries coming this summer and the summers in the future. And we also we're pretty active with promoting ourselves through Maine Tourism. Some folks from Maine Tourism came down a few years ago and sort of took us under their wing a little bit, and because they could really see the future and potential in what they call sort of experiential historic tourism. People like to go into places where things happened and and where things were made. And the especially cool part of what we do is that right now, anyway, for until these guys decide that they want to retire, they're being led on tours by people who worked there and by the people that made things there. So it is sort of a step back in time, and we know that we're not always going to have. Every year our available tour space sort of shrinks as the mills fill up with businesses. So continuing to evolve how those tours work is going to be is a major project for us and challenge for us. But ultimately we see a place for us in the mill always where we can have pieces on exhibit in various lobbies. That would be nice for the folks who live there to be able to see the pieces of the mill history.
So there's one part of the mill that seems to be the most interesting that you take your tours on, and I wonder if you could tell us what that is. I think you know what I'm referring to. I want you guys to
the
say
lagoon, right?
The lagoon, yes.
It's sort of it's always the final stop on the tour, and that will continue to be a feature on the tour.
Yeah.
So
tell us a little bit about it. What does it look like down there, and what was the purpose of it?
Well, where you're going really down to the canals that channeled the water that powered the machines, and the canal network that's under Biddeford, from what we understand, is not only unique in Maine but unique in any part of the world. The vast canal network that was constructed and how it was constructed, and literally by hand, in many cases by people who had built, cathedrals in Greece or Italy. I guess, some of those masons came out specifically to build these canals, and so you're really seeing something that's like almost otherworldly down there. It's it gives you a glimpse into the amount of work that was where Biddeford was literally built from the ground up or below the ground up.
Because the whole thing depended on water power.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, I think if we think really sort of long term, one of the parts of the museum that sort of has spoken to me is that environmental factor and the industrial factor of the museum. And some of those, the world is moving back in that direction in many cases, alternate forms of power and fuel. And I think we can almost see the Biddeford Mills Museum as a science museum of sorts sometime in the future, where we can have, an exhibit that talks about how water powered a wheel, that powered the belt, that powered this, that led to the blanket being able to be made.
Yeah.
And that's that's for us, that's sort of the vision, because that's, so often when kids do come through, they're sort of awed by the grandeur of the space, but it would be great to be able to show people what was in the space. And we have lots of photos of that, but it would be neat to have a miniature working weave room where people could see the steps in the process of power that led to the production, that led to the product and the output. And that's what we really want people to have an appreciation for, is the people that made this happen.
Yeah.
There's also the architectural angle too, because before they built the building, they had to build the canal.
Right.
And in the 1840s, it was the Irish that came over, and they did a lot of the digging, hand digging of the canals. And then, as he mentioned, there were Italians and Greeks that came over that did a lot of the masonry work. And the canals have huge arced entrances and exits. And if you look at them closely, there is no mortar in them. And that is a technique that was used for years in Europe, as he said, to build the cathedrals. And so that hopefully way down the road, if we can get enough money, hopefully we'll be able to expand the lagoon part and let's people see more of the canals. Right now it's kind of roughly scaffolded, and you can't go really in. There's no water there because it's been all turned off. And then just the brickwork itself, the walls are like 2.5 feet thick. And so you go in there on a hot day, and if you're down by the lagoon, you need a sweater. So that, and other places are hotter, but it's really something that the Pepperell did keep up their buildings very well. So that's a benefit to us. And one of the rooms that you go into, they have what they call sawtooth roofing, so that if you look outside, it's kind of like angled windows,
Right.
and to give the place more light. Of course, one of the union people that usually does one of the tours says, of course, that was to make us work longer.
Yeah, later in the
anyway,
day. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, but there are interesting aspects. Because they had such a diversified group of people, the bathrooms in the mill had an arc on top of the door, so that if someone came up to you and wanted to know where the bathroom is, because that's key, they could just draw an arc or point to the arc, and
everyone would understand.
Everyone would understand that, more or less like sign language. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't think we tend to think of those things today, other than the universal signs that we have today.
And we certainly have heard stories of how far you can go underground, from Mulligan's all the way, down to sort of North Dam Mill. I don't know if you can go quite that far, but I know that a lot of people talk about, the sprawling expanse of the network of the tunnels underground.
That's right.
And, and I'm sure that there are people that live in town that have been in there. I mean, it wasn't a place that was readily open and accessible, and isn't now either, but I think that there are certainly people that have been down there, or that may have been taken down there on a special sort of tour for some reason. And I think that network that lies under the city is one of the lesser known aspects of the city. And I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but Biddeford Historical Society is doing fireside chats at their meeting house, and David Flood has done a lot of research, and he's a member of the community and a building owner from downtown, and he's done a lot of research on the tunnels, because we have some of the original architectural notebooks of the tunnel construction at the library. We've actually digitized those, so anyone can access them from home if they go to the library website.
Are they in your
ask at the
collection,
library.
the library's
Those
collection?
are in MacArthur Library's collection,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
And so he's done a lot of research on the tunnels, and he's going to do a talk at the Meeting House. I can't remember if it's before the end of the summer or if it's sometime in the fall, but Biddeford Historical Society is in the process of redoing their website, and they'll have that full schedule up on their website. And we'll be, promoting that at the library too. And he's going to do a chat specifically about the tunnels, which will be pretty fascinating since he's done a lot of research. The Biddeford Mills Museum website is probably a good thing to mention too for people who do want more information about how to go on a tour. We do tours Thursday and Saturday mornings up until all summer long, up until the weekend of Labor Day. We are not doing tours during the week of the 4th of July. For the holiday, but after that we'll resume regular schedule. You actually call Heart of Biddeford to book the tour. All the information is on the Biddeford. It's www.biddefordmillsmuseum.org. All the information is up on that site about the booking of the tours, how to donate, how to express your interest in becoming a volunteer. We're going to have some more information on the website eventually about the exhibit once that's up and running and open. But that's certainly the best way to contact us right now is via the website.
And you are indeed looking for new volunteers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Volunteers, donations, I mean, like I said, funding and people, that's, the big challenges for us.
Yeah. And what kind of things would you like to acquire? What's on top of your wish list for artifacts you'd like to acquire?
Well, I guess there's a number of things we could acquire, whether it's artifacts for the collection, like a loom, for example, or actually equipment for us in terms of AV equipment or computer equipment, things that can improve our outreach program. Certainly, funding towards the construction of this exhibit is really important at this point, because we hope to have an audiovisual component of the exhibit, but really need to raise money for that. What we're envisioning is a station where you might be able to press a button and hear an interview with headphones,
Yep.
an interview that was done by a former mill worker, or you might be able to press a button and hear a history of, Building 13, which is where the exhibit is going to be, for example. So there's a number of different uses for funding, whether it's the big thing for the collection is obviously trying to find things that are representative of the 19th century
Right.
component of the mills.
Right.
Whether that is machinery or, a lot of that can be displayed from a space efficiency point of view, can be displayed in a two-dimensional way. We don't necessarily need a representation or a physical machine. We don't need all the machines to be there. We won't necessarily have the space in a new space to have lots of things, but it certainly would be nice to have a couple of things like that.
Right.
And then obviously we envision these exhibits being portable, because that space is used for other events too. So everything that's there is going to be portable enough for us to take into a new space sometime too.
Yep. Yep.
Plus, of course, we're unique in the sense that Velux was invented in Biddeford.
That's right.
So we've got people that are giving the tours now that worked in that department. And it was almost like the Manhattan Project for the atomic bomb, as far as secrecy went, to develop that Velux material. And Velux was a material that had no cotton in it, so that was one of the prerequisites of getting something new that they could sell that had no cotton, because of course most of the cotton mills had gone south, because transporting it north was just an added cost.
That's right.
So they developed the Velux blanket, which is basically an petroleum-based product. And that was fine until you got later on, as the gas prices went up or the oil prices went up, then that became more difficult.
And the selling point of the Velux really was that it was light but warm.
Yeah.
So typically the warmer the blanket, the heavier it was on your body, but Velux was a light blanket, and it's something that a lot of
Which was
people-
revolutionary at the time.
It was, and it was. I mean, I can remember Velux blankets being in on my bed, but also if you go to a hotel or motel,
Oh, yeah.
everyone had Velux blankets.
Anybody who's been in a mid-range motel of the
Yeah.
last 40 years has seen a Velux blanket.
Yeah, and they're still being made, and I think when you buy them, some of them still do say Biddeford blanket. I think that branding and that name has been sold a few different times to different companies. I think West Point, which was at one point, the Pepperell Mills went through many different ownership and name changes, and I think West Point Home, is that right? West Point
That's
Homes,
one of them, yeah.
something like that. And I think that West Point name is still out there in the world. I think they're still producing textiles. So yeah, I mean, but that's another kind of interesting aspect of the collection too, is we still do have some product and some originally sort of still wrapped product blankets. And I know there are other people that have some material that once we're in a space where we can sort of exhibit that are going to donate things like that too. Some original sheets and some original examples of products that were made in the mills. So that'll be a neat thing for people to see too.
Good, good. Well, one more time, anyone who's interested can go to biddefordmillsmuseum.org. Jeff, thank you so much for coming in
Thank you, Brad.
and talking to us. It's been good.
Thank you.
Priscilla, thank you very much. And thank you all viewers. Come back again next time for another edition of Believe in Biddeford.